Hi, I'm Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, and this is this week's issue of the Libertarian Angle, the show that brings you the libertarian perspective on the burning issues of the day. I'm joined by, as always, by my co-host Richard Ebeling, who is teaching economics at the Citadel. Richard, welcome back to the Libertarian Angle.
It's great to be here and with our viewers and listeners.
Yeah, likewise. I thought we'd discuss economics, a subject near and dear to your heart. Especially because it's now percolating as part of the presidential campaign. Donald Trump just gave a big speech on economics where he set forth his plan for revitalizing America, and a lot of people are supporting him because he's a businessman and he's going to make America run again. And then you have Hillary over here talking at the Democratic National Convention about how great things are in America and how wonderful economic conditions have been under Barack Obama. And we all know that that's just not true, that things are in a deep morass in this country. People don't save any money anymore. Lots of people are having trouble making ends meet. I know of young people that are still living with their parents in their 20s, and sometimes even their early 30s, because it's just too difficult to get started in life. They can't get that nest egg to buy a house. They have difficulty renting an apartment. And it's just things don't have that shine on them as they have in days gone by. I think people get the sense that things are not likely to get any better, and they're very likely to get worse. I mean, you've got out of control spending, out of control debt. You've got a mountain of debt that's hanging over the American people. And on top of that debt, you've got the unfunded liabilities hanging over everybody. And you've got this huge monstrosity of the federal government composed primarily of the welfare state way of life, the warfare state way of life, that really is the suppressant. It's the depressant. It's burdening the American society to such a point where it really doesn't matter, in my opinion, who is elected president. Now, the other part of this that I thought I'd raise is the idea of the centrally managed or government planned economy. I mean, both candidates are running on that basis, that I'm the better person to manage the economy, to run the economy. We hear this every 4 years. And so it's this mindset that hardly anyone, with the exception of libertarians, challenges. That why is it that we have a presidentially managed, a governmentally managed economy in America? That's not what a private property free market system is supposed to be all about. And that I hold that it's precisely because you have a government managed economy along with a welfare state and a warfare state that is the predominant cause of the economic morass in which America finds itself. That means that the ultimate solution to this problem lies not with getting better people in public office, as so many people maintain. It lies with a systemic change. And that change involves an admission that it was a big mistake to adopt the welfare state way of life, and I include the drug war in that, and that it was an even bigger mistake to convert the federal government into a national security state. That I think these two big mistakes, along with a government-managed economy, are the predominant reason why Americans are suffering economic morass and are likely to do so in the near term. What do you think?
Well, I think, obviously, the gist of your comment, it's indicated by the type of arguments or promises that the candidates make. For example, is economic growth too low in the United States? Traditionally, historically, generally measured quantitatively, growth in the United States, looking over the last 100 years, has on average and in general been about 3% a year. Over the last several years, growth has been far below that trend pattern. So what is the response of the politician? Well, it must be, first of all, some fault in the economy itself. People are not doing what's needed to get the economy moving faster and better in terms of greater output, more jobs, and so on. So then they say, I have a plan. Now, it may not be like the old-fashioned Soviet central plan, where the government controls the means of production, owns and directs everything from one unified planning center. But it is no less the planning mentality. You elect me, and I will see that economic growth gets to 3% a year, 4% a year. Elect me, and I will see that the economy generates the wealth for government-directed and managed infrastructure improvements and innovation. Elect me, and I will see that we'll limit foreign imports, and I will tell you how many jobs I will create in the domestic economy. There is this attitude that a handful of individuals and their advisors and counselors and staff members in Washington, D.C. have the knowledge, wisdom, and ability to micromanage and macromanage the economy to a pattern of levels of employment, output, growth, rising wages, and so on. It is that planning mentality that is the fundamental problem of everything we face in this country. We need to focus on the reasons why that is not possible. And again, I'll hark back to themes that occasionally we've talked about, and that is the Austrian critique of government intervention and regulation. Specifically, the type of arguments that the Nobel Prize-winning economist Friedrich Hayek made many decades ago and stand as true today as when he wrote them. And that is, no one individual or group of individuals has the knowledge, insight, ability, or capacity to know, integrate, and coordinate all of the knowledge in the society that is divided and dispersed among the minds of all the social participants sufficiently well to know how to direct, plan, and guide the economic affairs of what in the United States is over 320 million people. There is only one way to take advantage of all the knowledge, talents, and abilities of the members of the society, and that is to leave them alone. Alone in their rights to their life and their liberty and their honestly acquired property, to peacefully interact with their fellow in society, guided by market signals of prices and profits and the incentives of competition, to coordinate their wishes, desires, and demands as consumers and their abilities to produce and supply as that is the only way that we can have a functioning and effective economy. All of these planning policies, whether it be government deficit spending, whether it be monetary central planning through the Federal Reserve, all of these, in fact, create the hardships, burdens, frustrations, imbalances, and sluggishness that we see in the economy. There is no way to solve these problems than to get government out of the way and to allow people themselves to decide, choose, and interact with their fellow society members in ways that will generate the wealth. Now, but how much growth should we have? How much should wages be going up? How much increases in output should there be? The fact is there is no single or right answer for that. The amount of growth, the employment created, the wages that rise in various employments and occupations are themselves discovered only through the interactions of the market themselves, for their decisions to consume, to save, to invest, to use resources wisely in productive ways, and so on. All of this is a smoke and mirrors of a false conception that the government knows what the economy should be doing, and that they have the knowledge, wisdom, and ability to be at the controls to micro and macro manage it. In fact, all of these are the sources of the problems that we now suffer. Not the market. It is not a crisis of capitalism. It's not a crisis of the market economy. It is the crisis of the interventionist regulatory state.
Yeah, I'm glad you pointed out that at the end, because it goes back to my point that this really is a systemic problem. It's not a problem of getting better people in public office. You know, I see everybody wringing their hands over, oh my gosh, how did we end up with Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump? But it really doesn't make any difference who is elected president if you've got a bad system. And that's what Americans need to confront. This is what we libertarians do. We make people confront what might be discomforting truths. When you talk about we need a system where the government leaves people alone, where they can plan their own affairs and decide for themselves what to do. I mean, I think back, as you were saying that, to, let's say, 1890 America. Okay, not a pure libertarian society. We know there was some crony capitalism going on. But imagine here was a society where there was no IRS in existence, no income tax, no Social Security, no welfare, no Medicare, no farm subsidies, no big military establishment, no CIA, no NSA, no Pentagon. I mean, here was a society where we've come as close as possible to what you're talking about, where the government leaves people alone, where people were free to manage their own lives, decide for themselves what to do with their own money. They could accumulate unlimited amounts of wealth. The poor were going from rags to riches in 1 or 2 generations in many cases. I mean, people were not focused on growth. Growth was just this natural outcome. Things were booming in 1890. I think it's been said that the standard of living doubled and then doubled again. And it wasn't because people were thinking, oh, well, we need a certain amount, like 50% growth or 100% growth. They were thinking in terms of what does it mean to be free, as you pointed out. And the byproduct of striving for that free society, as imperfect as it may have been, was this enormous outgrowth of economic prosperity, the building of capital that made people more productive. All right, so if you fast forward into the 1930s, 40s, 50s, 60s, you see the abandonment of that philosophy. You see the advent of the Federal Reserve System instead of gold and silver coins, which had been the official money of the United States under the Constitution for more than 100 years. You get the IRS, you get the income tax, the Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, the whole burgeoning welfare state. And then in the 50s, in the 40s, you get the national security establishment, the big standing army, the Pentagon, the CIA, regime change operations, assassinations, coups, and then, of course, the out of control spending and debt and the mountain of debt that we now have. And so even if they were, you got the best candidate in the world running, Richard, I think that none of them could do anything with this system. Not only because central planned economies tend toward chaos, but because the system itself is incapable of being run well, efficiently, and to the betterment of mankind. That means that we need a systemic change, an acknowledgement by Americans that says this was a bad mistake to have abandoned our founding principles in favor of a welfare state and in favor of a warfare state, dismantle these systems and restore a free market limited government society.
Yes, that is why advocates, friends of freedom, must be thinking of something beyond this current presidential cycle. The fact is, whatever outcome comes in November, whether it be the Democratic Party candidate or the Republican Party candidate, that ends up taking the oath of office on the steps of the Capitol building and then sits at the desk in the Oval Office at the White House. The system will continue going on in the direction that you've said, because that is what is institutionally into the system today. In other words, the government plans, the government taxes, the government regulates, the government redistributes, the central bank introduces monetary manipulation and interest rate manipulation, and that's the way it is. What we have to be looking is beyond this particular cycle, to realize that regardless of whether it's Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump, the system will go on. All that is in sitting in the Oval Office will determine is in what particular direction and for what particular special interest will the spending and the regulation be used to benefit some as opposed to others. What we have to be thinking as advocates of liberty is to persuade our fellow citizens to rethink outside of what has now become the box, the institutional establishment box. And that thinking out of the box is precisely to ask our fellow citizens, why is it that you believe and have confidence in the ability of a handful of people sitting in Washington, D.C., who have their own political and personal power-lusting agendas, that they have the knowledge, wisdom, and ability to manage your life better than if you had greater control of that destiny in your own hands? That is what we need to inform our fellow citizens. And to make those historical comparisons, as you just made about the late 19th century, that at a time when virtually the government did nothing, very little in terms of government regulation and intervention, the economy grew immensely. 1865 to 1900, that period that you're referring to in American history, was America's Industrial Revolution. There was no government-business partnerships. There were no tax breaks for attracting industry into one part of the country as opposed to another. There were no regulations of this, that, and the other. There was only one regulatory agency, the Interstate Commerce Commission, which was set up in 1877. And that was basically a way of rigging the railway rates so a bunch of railway companies could try to bilk the market. That was big. Other than that, the government was out of the arena of the marketplace. We had an average annual increase of economic growth in the economy of approximately 3 to 3.5%. Wages rose, standards of living went up, prices fell, not because of depression, but because of innovation that resulted in more goods produced at lower costs, so competitively they could be offered to the consuming public at lower prices, and wisely managed firms could still make a profit out of it. That is what is the example of what is possible without government in the way for managing people's lives. And so we need to use those historical clues and to ask our fellow citizens, why shouldn't they have control and determining direction of their own life decisions and what they want to do and how they want to do it with whom, with the happy unintended consequence being is growth, rising standards of living, increasing employment, and more goods and services offered to us at not higher costs, but lower costs that improve our quality of life by enabling us to buy more for less.
Yeah, I'm glad you raised that notion of what we really do as libertarians, and especially here at FFF. I mean, we raise people's vision to a higher level. I mean, if you go back to 1776 or 1787, when they started talking about the Constitution, I mean, people really had to rise to a higher level instead of their dealing with just the general daily problems of life. They started thinking at a higher level. What is it that we want for America? What should be the role of government in a free society? And though that's the kind of level that I think you're talking about when we say we challenge people to think at a higher level. Sure, we've got these two presidential candidates, both of which are disasters, but that doesn't mean that things are inevitable. And I think the temptation for all too many libertarians is to say, oh, well, gosh, we don't have a chance. Let's make peace with the welfare warfare state and just devote our lives to reforming it. Not so. Despite who's elected president, if you reach a critical mass in society of people that want a free society, that know what a free society is all about, opportunities inevitably present themselves where those giant paradigm shifts can take place. I mean, I remember, Richard, when you and I first started having discussions about libertarianism back in the late 1980s. You may not recall this, but you said to me, there is no way that the Berlin Wall could ever come crashing down and the Soviet Union dismantled without a violent revolution because they have all the guns. And that obviously was the logical position at the time. I mean, the Soviet Union was this monolithic institution that had a monopoly of force over its citizens. And yet, suddenly, unexpectedly, the Berlin Wall comes crashing down, the Soviet Union gets dismantled. This is through the power of ideas, that ideas can shift a society. And that's what we're all about here. It's not about getting better people in public office. It's about challenging people to think at a higher level of why do we need a welfare state? Why should there be mandatory charity? Why should people be forced to share their money with others? Why not a system based on voluntary charity? Same with the national security establishment. What do we need it for? It's the root cause of the terrorist blowback against America. It's contributing to the out-of-control spending and debt. It's certainly doing nothing to keep us safe. It's doing the exact opposite. And so this is what Americans need to start doing, just the same way Eastern Europeans started challenging the notion of a Soviet Union or a centrally planned economy. That's what we need to start doing in America. And one other thing on this issue of growth is that notice that what they're trying to do is keep this system intact, but just get people to work harder in the private sector so that it can fund the welfare warfare state and nothing has to get dismantled. For a long time that worked in large part because of the massive amount of capital that came into existence through the late 1800s and early 1900s. But now the welfare warfare state component has become so gigantic that the private sector is unable to handle the burden. and it's starting to implode. And I think we're in for a very, very big economic crisis, assuming we stay on this same road of out of control spending and debt that we've been on. And people then, again, have to be asking themselves, is this what we want for America? Is this what we want to bequeath to our children and grandchildren? Or is there a better way? And I say there is. And of course, you're saying there is. And that way is libertarianism, a way of life where people are left alone by the government unless they're murdering, raping, and stealing or doing violent things to people. But where people are free to keep everything they earn, decide for themselves who to share it with, and where you don't have this giant military establishment that is really creating enormous amount of problems for America.
Yeah, one aspect of what you're saying about the attempt to keep the economy going in the private sector to be able to continue to fund all of this. It's very clear not only what Democrats say, but Republicans say, and not just Donald Trump. You will notice that when all of them are emphasizing what needs to be done in the realm of economic policy, they talk about tax cuts. They talk about forms of deregulation, all to the good. Taxes should be far less, and in fact, from a libertarian point of view, no higher than is necessary to fulfill those limited functions of protection of life and property. And the government's regulations obviously hamstring and prevent innovation, change, dynamic improvement for the good of what's to be done. But you notice the one thing that, as well as the Democrats, never forcefully or effectively or in detail say, that is, well, that's the taxing side. What are you going to do on the spending side? Their presumption is that the level of spending and the directions of government spending are impossible to reduce or abolish. What they want to do is through deregulation and tax reform is to get the private sector to be more productive so that the national economic pie can grow faster than the rate at which the government's slice of the pie is increasing. So that through a growth of the pie relative to the government slice becomes a decreasing proportion. If you can push the imagery there. But the problem is that, yes, could the economy grow faster? Historically, we know that if deregulation occurs and taxes are lower. But the fundamental problem that constantly makes this a burden, an albatross around the country's and the people's necks, is the spending side of the economy. As long as that is not first put under control and then reversed, this engine of government growth, as opposed to private sector economic improved growth, the engine of government growth will not stop or slow down. It is a monster with an insatiable appetite for more wealth, more power, more resources to redistribute for the purposes of buying votes, to put those in office into the seats of control. Therefore, the libertarian must emphasize not just the desirability of tax reform and a downward direction of all types, but the elimination of regulations of the private and market sectors, but that fundamentally the cause of all of our problems is that government has no restrictions on what it spends on and how much it spends on, and in fact has no benchmark of answering the question, well, what is it the government should spend money on? Now, the classical liberal, the libertarian, makes it very clear. It should be spending no more money than constitutionally is required to protect the life, liberty, and honestly acquired property of the citizens. Every dime, every penny greater than that is an unnecessary, undesirable, and ethically immoral expenditure. Now, until we deal with that spending side, there will be no answer to the economic dilemma in the U.S. economy or in any other economy around the world.
Yeah, if you look back at the early part of the 1800s, the federal government was effectively doing nothing. I mean, you didn't have any of these departments and agencies. Well, you had a Treasury Department, and I think you had a Justice Department that was composed of probably 2 lawyers. But no Department of Education, Commerce, well, maybe Commerce, but none of the welfare state bureaucracies and regulatory state bureaucracies that you have today. And so you didn't need an income tax. I mean, you didn't have a big giant military establishment. There was a small permanent standing army, but nothing like we have today. No foreign military bases, no CIA, no NSA. And so the federal government essentially was doing practically nothing. Crimes like rape and murder and stealing and so forth were traditional state crimes to be prosecuted at the state level. And this was the cause of wealth in America. I mean, when government got out of the protection business with welfare state, taking care of people, watching over them, and providing them sustenance, that was the cause of this tremendous surge in economic activity throughout the 1800s. Now, again, I'm not saying it was a pure libertarian paradise. There was slavery, there was lots of other bad things, tariffs, and so forth. But they provided the key, based on what they understood in economics from Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations, that this was the key to an ever burgeoning economically prosperous society. And that's what we do, is we ask people, what should be the role of government in a free society? Should it be taking money from one group of people and giving it to another group of people, whether it's Social Security, Medicare, farm subsidies, aid to dictators, or whatever? Why should the government be doing that? Why not just leave people free to keep what they earn, and they decide on helping their parents out, helping their friends out, helping out in charitable activities, donating to the church, or whatever? And then, of course, why is it necessary to have this whole Cold War apparatus known as the national security establishment when the Cold War ended many, many years ago? And so when people start thinking at that level, Richard, then all of a sudden we're talking about some fundamental changes in American society, all for the good. At that point, I don't think people will get upset over who's being elected president, because the president won't have the enormous power that he has today. I think the main reason why you have this gigantic fight in the political arena today is what Hayek was talking about in The Road to Serfdom. The worst people in society are trying to get their hands on government power in order to distribute the largesse to their buddies, or to give their buddies prominent positions in the government and so forth. Once you dismantle the whole welfare warfare state aspects and just leave the core central legitimate powers of the federal government, it's like it really won't matter who's president, because they don't have all the jobs to give out and all the largesse to give out. But again, it's a systemic problem. That's why people need to start thinking at a higher level of what they want to see the federal government doing and being in the years ahead.
Yeah, that is the fundamental thing, and it requires us to think again, to emphasize beyond the current political or presidential cycle. What we're talking about is trying to if I can just make a point. In all of this sort of depression and despondency of following the daily news, we need to remember that clearly there is frustration, anger, disappointment, and questioning among a lot of our fellow citizens. It could be on the left of the Democratic Party, it could be, as we're going to the right, the Republican Party, but there is a deep sense that the country has been moving in the wrong direction. There's power, there's corruption, there's manipulation, there's favoritism, there's an inside clique that seem to use the system for their benefit at the expense of many others in the society. Now, that is the book that we suggest. Again, looking beyond just November, that we should be able to take advantage of as friends of freedom, to explain to our fellow citizens what have caused these problems that have generated the frustration, the anger, the disappointment, the frustration in you about the way the country is moving and the nature of the political establishment that manages things. Many people are sensing the problem. What they haven't clearly understood is the cause. And once they have a better understanding of the cause, that it's government intervention, regulation, control, distribution, micro and macro managing, once they can understand the cause, then you have the beginning of an entree into helping them understand the nature of the solution. And that is, if you don't want these things, then you have to downsize the size and scope of government. So as you were saying, there's less for government to be doing because it has less power to do it, and therefore it won't matter as much who holds political office, because these will be minor aspects of a wider social system in which the private sector dominates and the government sector is a small appendage merely to secure people in their liberty and property.
Yeah, that's a great point. That all too many people don't understand what the cause of the problems are, and they really are rooted in this abandonment of America's founding principles and the adoption of the welfare state, warfare state way of life. And once people realize that that's the core root cause of the problem, they'll stop looking for candidates that are going to make the system work and instead start thinking in terms of how can I dismantle this kind of system in order to restore the founding principles of economic liberty and personal liberty and privacy to America. And then that's when all of a sudden we get the country back on the right track, regardless of who's elected president. All right, Richard, on that note, we'll wrap things up. Great to be back with you, and we'll see our viewers, and I'll see you next week.
Absolutely.